Thank you. So I've been told that I have 20 minutes to talk, and let me just say very quickly that you can't talk about all of the problems in public education in America today in 20 minutes. So I am instead going to focus my comments on what I think some of the solutions are, some of the things that we have to do to change the trajectory of public schools in our nation. But let me give you a little bit of context before I get started. I'm going to share with you some of the statistics that we face today as a nation. The first is that we are spending about double the amount of money per child, actually a little bit more than double the amount of money per child on public education today than we were a few decades ago. But the problem is that the results have not gotten better. We are in a situation where the children who are in school today will be the first generation of Americans who are less well educated than their parents were, for the first time in the history of this country. Out of 34 developed nations across the entire globe, we rate 25th out of 34 in math skills of our children. And the SAT scores were just released a few weeks ago in the country, and what it said was that they were the lowest in the history of the test. So that's a little bit around the problems that we are facing in the country. My comments today are going to be focused on the time that I spent leading the Washington, D.C. public schools, which I did for 3.5 years. And you may have heard a little bit about what happened in D.C. We had a very interesting 3.5 years. We had the opportunity, because my boss, the mayor, actually took over control of the schools and got rid of the school board. We had the ability and the power to do more to change that broken system than ever had been seen. We inherited a school system that was incredibly dysfunctional. It was one of the lowest performing school districts in the entire nation. And just to give you some statistics around this, when we inherited the school district, there was a 70 percentage point achievement gap from where the white kids were performing with the black kids, 70 percentage point gap. We had a situation where if you were a 9th grader entering into high school in our system, the chances that you would graduate from high school and then go on to graduate from college was about 9%. 9%. And of all of the 8th graders in the city's schools, only 8% of them were operating on grade level in mathematics. 8%. Which means that 92% of our young people did not have the skills and knowledge necessary to be productive members of society. So that's the situation that we faced. We decided that we were going to take it full on, and we made a lot of very necessary but also very controversial decisions. We closed over 30 schools, which was about 25% of the number of schools in the system overall. I replaced about 2/3 of the principals in the district and cut the central office staff in half. We started during my tenure with about 1,000 central office staff members, and by the time I left, we had a little more than 400. So these things, though they were very necessary, were also very painful and controversial things to undertake. And I thought at the time that if we produced results, if we produce outsized results, that people would want those results to continue. But I was absolutely wrong. People didn't really care a whole lot about the results. What they cared more about was the processes and the feelings that people had about how we got there. And this is part of the problem that I think we face as a country today, is that how our school districts are run and what we are focused on is all wrong. So I'm going to spend my time today talking about the 3 things that I think we need to do as a country if we are going to set ourselves on a different path and a path for success. The first thing is that we have to, as a nation, begin to recognize and reward and honor teachers for the incredibly difficult jobs that they have to do every day. And I say this because right now there's sort of a lot of conversations about teachers and what role they play. And unfortunately, I'm hearing a lot of people say, well, you know, teachers can't really do that much because what they inherit the group of students that they get, right? And if you have a group of students who nobody fed them the breakfast, you know, in the morning before they came to school, nobody put them to bed at a decent hour the night before, or maybe the electricity got cut off in their house and so the kids didn't actually have any lights to do their homework under. There's nothing that teachers can do to solve those problems. And let me say very clearly that we can't expect that teachers are going to solve all of the ills of poverty in our society. They cannot do that. They cannot make up for what, you know, what their parents are sort of doing or not doing at home. But to say that teachers can't make a tremendous impact on their children's lives is absolutely wrong. It's absolutely wrong. In fact, when I was in DC, people used to stop me on the street all the time and say, "You have the hardest job in the whole city," because they'd see how people were screaming at me all the time and protesting in front of my office. And I'd say, "No, I don't. The hardest job in this city is being an effective teacher in one of our classrooms. When you have 25 to 125 kids who are counting on you every single day to make sure that they're getting the skills that they need to be successful." So let me tell you a quick story. When I was first came to DC, I decided very early on that I wanted to visit schools as often as I possibly could. But I very quickly realized that I could not tell anybody that I was coming to the school ahead of time, because when I did that, they would have the marching band and the cheerleaders out, you know, and that's not what I want. I didn't want the dog and pony show. I wanted to actually see what was happening in classrooms every day when I wasn't there. So I would make these unannounced visits. So I chose this one school in particular on this day, and it was in one of the most troubled neighborhoods in the entire city. Crime rates and murder rates at all-time highs, et cetera. And across the street from this school that I chose to visit that day was a liquor store and a nightclub. And as I was walking up into the school, there were broken beer bottles and cigarette butts and syringes on the path that the kids walk every day. So I walked into the school, chose a random hallway, and just picked a classroom and walked in. And what I saw in this classroom was absolutely amazing. There were 30 kids, fourth graders, and they were all absolutely riveted by their teacher. So they couldn't care less that the little Korean lady had walked in the room. They were all paying attention to the teacher. And I was sort of picking up from context clues that they were learning a unit about Greek mythology. So they're reading a chapter book together, and this book was about a group of children who traveled back in time, back to the time of Greek gods, and they were at the part of the story where they wanted to go back home. So the teacher said to the kids, "Okay, please look up at the posters around the wall," and she created all of these posters, each one of a different Greek god and what they were the god of, and she said, "And tell me, if you were one of these kids in the story, and you could only call on one Greek god to help you travel back in time, which god would it be?" So I look at the posters, I get my answer, I'm ready. The first kid raises his hand and he said, "I would choose Zeus, because Zeus is the god of gods. He's the boss of everybody else. If he tells you to do something, you have to do it." He said, "So I figured just cut out the middleman and go straight to the big guy." I was like, that's a pretty good answer. Second kid raises her hand. She said, "I would choose this god. It was the god of women, children, and families." She said, "These are kids that we're talking about. She's the god of children. She's got to take care of her peeps. So I would choose her." I said, "That's another good answer." The third kid raises his hand and he said, "I would choose this god. It was the god of art, music, and literature." So I'm thinking to myself, okay, kid, that was a total misfire. But then the kid goes on to explain. He says, "As you'll remember in the book, the way the kids traveled back in time was that they had dug up an old Greek lyre, and they strummed the strings of the lyre, and they got transported back in time." He said, "So I figure if they have to go back, it has something to do with the lyre. They should call on the god of music." I said, that was pretty good too. These kids gave 6 unbelievably creative and innovative answers before somebody came up with my ever lame answer of the god of travel. And I can tell you that this classroom was exactly what you want to see. The kids were using their critical thinking and their analytical skills. The teacher had every single one of them engaged. It was a wonderful classroom. So I walk out of that classroom, I am happy. I walk into the classroom across the hall to exactly the opposite situation. I walk into this classroom and I almost knock over the teacher who is standing at the door. And she's screaming at the top of her lungs, "Everybody be quiet!" She's like, "I don't know what's wrong with you people. I have been telling you to be quiet and nobody is listening to me." She said, "I am going to count down from 10, and by the time I get to 1, everybody should have their mouth closed." So then she starts counting down, 10, 9, and she's flicking the light switch on and off. 8, flick, 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 7, flick. You know, she gets to 6 and she's still flicking, and then she starts saying, "I'm waiting, I'm waiting." And the kids are like, "We're waiting too for something to happen." I was in both of these classrooms for no more than 10 to 15 minutes apiece. The same group of kids from the same troubled neighborhood who were coming into school every day into the same dilapidated school building with rainwater leaking through the roof and ceiling tiles falling on their heads. These two groups of children getting two wildly different educational experiences because of the adults who were in front of them every single day. I very, very strongly believe, and the research backs this up, that teachers matter and that we have to begin respecting teachers in a completely different manner in this country. It was interesting. I was just at a meeting and somebody said to me, they asked me this question, they said, "Well, you are talking about honoring teachers, but you also are an advocate of firing ineffective teachers. How do you reconcile those two things?" And I said, "Are you kidding me? Those two things are 100% aligned. If we are really going to honor the teaching profession and teachers, we have to acknowledge the fact that teaching is really, really hard and not everybody can do it well. And if we're going to acknowledge that not everyone can do it well because it is so challenging, that means that some people were not cut out for it, and for those people who are not effective with kids, we have to find another profession for them. And we have to recognize and reward the people who are highly effective and do this extraordinarily well. That dynamic is what honors the profession overall. So that's my first point. My second point of what we have to do as a country is we have to regain the American competitive spirit. We as a country have gone completely soft. We are so busy trying to make children feel good about themselves that we have lost sight of taking the time that is required to actually make them good at something. So let me explain this in my own household. I have two daughters. I have a 12-year-old and a 9-year-old. Both of my kids play soccer. They suck at soccer. I mean, they are bad because they take after their mother in athletic abilities or inabilities. It is almost painful to watch them running around on the field. But if you were to go into their rooms today, you would see trophies and medals and ribbons and plaques. If you did not know any better and you walked into my house, you'd say, "Michelle Rhee is raising the next Mia Hamm." I assure you, I am not. So I try to talk to my kids about this. I try to say, "Baby, you are not so good at soccer. If you want to become good, you have to put the time in, 90 minutes a day. You have to be kicking the ball up against the wall and in the net and run sprints. You have to put that much effort into it. And even if you do that, I still can't guarantee you that you're going to be any good because you've inherited my genes. But that's what it takes to be excellent at something." And my kids look at me like I'm crazy. Like, "Lady, have you not seen the medals in my room? Do I need to bring them down to show you again?" I was talking a few months ago to a very well-known philanthropist down in Texas, and he relayed this story to me. Now, in Texas, they have no problem cursing. I do not swear, so I'm going to modify this a little bit. Basically, he said, "Michelle, what the bleep is going on in America today?" He said, "This summer, I went to my great-grandchild's summer camp awards ceremony." He said it lasted for 3.5 hours because every single kid had to run up and down the stage. He said by the end of it, it was so bad that it sounded like this. The next award goes to the best 10-year-old, blonde-haired, blue-eyed boy named Bobby who's wearing red shorts today. And then Bobby would run up to the stage with his arms over his head, and Bobby's parents would be snapping pictures and clapping. And he said, I could tell just by looking at these kids that most of them, if not more, were just average or below. Why did we have to give an award to every single one of them? Because I can tell you that what they're doing in other countries is very, very different. When I was a young person, my parents sent me to Seoul, South Korea, to spend a year there to learn how to read and write Korean. And it was the most jarring experience that I'd ever had, because in Korea back in those days, they stuck you in a classroom of 70 kids, and they ranked you from 1 to 70. I was 70 because I was learning Korean as a second language. But every single kid knew exactly where they stood. So if you were number 18, your mother was on you. Like, by the end of the semester, you better be at least 13, right? And if you were 8, you wanted to get to 6 and 5. And conceivably, there should have only been one happy kid in that classroom. And that was number 1, right? But that kid was actually the most miserable kid in the classroom, because he's looking behind him all the time going, oh my God, here comes number 3, or number 2 is going to catch up and overtake me, and then I'm going to be in trouble. But there was an inborn sense of competition and always working hard to get ahead that they had in the culture, which I think is part of what we have to regain in our culture. Because if we are raising a next generation of children who are taught to celebrate mediocrity, then I don't think that they're going to be able to compete in the global marketplace. They're not going to be able to stand up against their competitors from places like India and Japan and China across the globe. In order to make sure that our kids compete, we have to build in them the sense of always working hard to get better. Not that even if you do the bare minimum, you can still be great and we're going to recognize you anyways. So recapturing the American competitive spirit is the second thing. And the last and probably the most important thing that I think we need to do as a nation is we need to begin to put the politics aside. Right? No more partisan politics driving the agenda when it comes to education. Because we've gotten ourselves into a situation where your party affiliation drives your decision making. So if you're a Republican, no taxes, and if you're a Democrat, no cuts, and no one can see the good ideas that happen to come from the other party. And this is a very, very significant problem in education, and it's holding us back. So let me just tell you my last anecdote, which is what happened sort of in terms of my political education when I went to DC. So I am a Democrat, lifelong, card-carrying, dyed-in-the-world Democrat, always have been, always will be. So because of that, I had certain ideas about what education reform should look like and what it shouldn't look like. And where I drew a really bright line was at vouchers, right? So according to my party, vouchers are bad. You are throwing a life preserver out to a minority of kids. What about the other kids who are stuck in the system? Or you're taking money away from the very schools and districts that need them the most, right? So I thought vouchers are not a good thing. Well, when I got to DC, there actually was a publicly funded voucher program. And that voucher program was up for reauthorization. And so people wanted to know, because you are the highest ranking official in the city on education, what do you think about this? And I knew how I was inclined, but I first wanted to do a little bit of research before I sort of came out publicly. And so what happened over the next few months was fascinating. I met with parents throughout the city, mostly young mothers, who had done everything exactly the way that we would have wanted them to do. So the first thing that they did was they researched their neighborhood school. And they would often find that only 10% of the kids in their neighborhood school were operating on grade level. So they'd say, my kid has a 90% chance of failure, not good enough for my child, I'm not going to send him there. probably the decision that we would all make for our kids. Then they would do the next best thing that we would recommend as a district. They would take their children and fill out an application and try to apply through the out-of-boundary lottery process to get a spot at one of the high-performing schools on the other side of town. And inevitably, they would not get a spot there because there were only a handful of positions available and thousands of families applying every year. So then these mothers would come to me and they'd say, okay, now what do I do? And as I was looking across the table at these mothers who wanted nothing different for their kids than what I wanted for mine, I thought, if I don't have a space at a school, a DC public school, that I would send my own children to, then how could I possibly deny this mother a $7,500 voucher, which, by the way, was a lot less money than what we were spending per child, so that she could take that and potentially send her kids to, say, a parochial school and get a great education? I was just not willing to look that mother in the eye and say, you know what, just suck it up with me for a little while. I need 5 years to fix this system, and I need you to stick with me during those 5 years. Your kid may not learn how to read, but that's what I need. No, I wasn't willing to have that conversation with any mother, so I decided to come out in favor of the voucher program. People went, you might be clapping. People in DC were not clapping. People went ballistic. I mean, you know, the Democratic Party said, you're going against the party. But the most interesting people who were against me coming out were my biggest supporters. Those people said to me, Michelle, you are the person who has the most to lose from the voucher program, because it will take enrollment away from your district and therefore it will take money away. We believe in you. We think that you have actually the potential to do something about changing this system and turning it around. So you have to give yourself a chance to be successful. And I would look at those people and say, see, here's the problem with your thinking. My job is not to protect and preserve and defend a system that has been doing wrong by kids. My job is to make sure that every single kid in this city gets a great education. I am agnostic as to the delivery mechanism. As long as kids are in a great school, I am happy, and everybody else should be as well. So I've tried this argument out. Sometimes I win some people over. Most of the time, not really. In fact, a friend of mine and I were having a conversation the other day. She's a teacher, and I was trying to, bring her over to my side. She's like, yeah, no, I still don't buy it. So I said to her, okay, here's my last ditch effort. I said, Waiting for Superman. Did anybody in the audience see the movie Waiting for Superman? Okay. So the movie, for those of you who have not seen it, you should definitely go see it. It's a movie about the problems in public education today, but it follows 5 families throughout the nation. These parents who are just trying to get their kids into a good school, and their trials and tribulations. But there is this scene in the movie where this little girl, Bianca, can't go to school, and she's crying in the window watching her friends go to school because her mother has fallen behind on the tuition payments. So I say to my friend, Waiting for Superman, did you watch it? She said, yes. I said, okay, the scene where Bianca is not allowed to go to kindergarten graduation because her mother owes $500. How did that make you feel? And she said, oh, it was such an injustice. It was heart-wrenching. I wanted to write the check myself. I said, right, honey, that would be a voucher. Just a different kind. So my point on all of this is to say that if we looked outside of the parties and just made decisions and laws and policies based on children and their families in the same way that we would make decisions for our own kids, I guarantee you that we would have a wildly different legislative agenda than we do today. And it would not be a Republican agenda, and it would not be a Democratic agenda. It would be an agenda that put kids first, which is exactly where this country needs to go. So let me just... Let me end on this point. I believe that education is supposed to be the great equalizer in our country. It is supposed to be the thing that ensures that it doesn't matter if you're black or white, rich or poor. we have a public school system so that every single child can have an equal shot in life, right? If you work hard and you do the right thing, you can live the American dream. That is not the reality that most of the children in our nation face today. It's not the reality for the kids here in Minneapolis or St. Paul, Compton, California, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, anywhere across the country. That is not the reality that our children face. In Washington, D.C., if you grew up in Anacostia versus if you grew up in Georgetown, you got two amazingly different educational experiences. So essentially what that means is that we are still, in this day and age, we are still allowing the color of a child's skin and the zip code that they live in to dictate their educational attainment levels and therefore their life chances and their life outcomes. There is nothing that is a bigger social injustice that I can imagine, and in my mind, there is nothing more un-American than that. So I would hope that the people in this room don't leave this lunch saying, oh, that was interesting, but leave knowing that you have a part to play in this. You have to get active. You have to get politically active and begin holding your elected officials, many of whom are in this room and who want to push these reforms, but they need to hear from you. They need to know that this is what you want, because I guarantee you that they're hearing a whole lot from the other side that wants to maintain the status quo. So you need to let your voice be heard politically, and if you're not a political person and you don't necessarily believe in that, then you have to get involved in your schools. Go to your local schools, figure out if you can mentor and tutor a kid. There are some people here who are helping with the statewide third grade reading initiative. Whatever it takes, every single person has to play an active role in this in order for our country to turn the corner. So in my mind, that is the biggest thing. You have to become active. My new organization, Students First, is entering into Minnesota. We want people to become active in this movement. We want you to join us. But even if that's not the right thing for you, the most important thing is to do something, because we owe it to this country and to the next generation of young people to be able to live in a country where they know that they can reach their potential because they were able to attend a great school. Thank you.
Thank you, Michelle. That was terrific. We have time for just a couple of questions. So Michelle will take a question from the audience. Yes, sir, in the back.
Why not a mention of more resources into early childhood education as being one of your 3 items?
You know, people ask me about this a lot, more resources. And I think that as educators, we have gotten ourselves into a pickle. Because, as I said earlier in my speech, we've more than doubled the amount of money that we're spending on public education compared to a couple of decades ago. And that is controlling for inflation. And the results have not gotten better. Now, if we had doubled the amount of money that we were spending and our results had doubled, then it would be a very easy case to make. You know, we have legislators who are trying to cut our budget by 5%. We can show you, okay, this is what it's going to mean to proficiency levels. But we actually can't make that argument anymore. And so I can tell you, having run a school district, that in many cases, especially in places like Washington, D.C., Newark, New Jersey, where they spend $22,000 a kid, in D.C., where we were spending almost $17,000 per kid, the problem was not resources. The problem was where those resources were going, what expenditures we were investing in, and making sure that we were getting a return on the investments that we were making, that we weren't continuing to spend millions and millions of dollars a year on things that did not have any impact on children's educational achievement levels. So I feel like the first thing that we have to do is fix the fundamentals of the system. To continue to pour more money into a broken system is not going to produce different results. We have to change the fundamentals of the system first, and then we can make a determination as to whether or not we need more resources into that system.
Thank you. Have you seen through your travels examples whereby the political parties, which are so divided today, and the legislatures who are getting support from those political parties have been able to set aside the differences and start to do some of the activities that you've been talking about, and actually focusing on results for the teachers and the students, as opposed to the canned answers that we hear on both sides?
I haven't seen it in widespread ways yet. What I have seen is individual legislators who are willing to think about things in a different way. So, for example, I met with a group of legislators earlier. It was a bipartisan group, and what the Democrats in the room were saying was, how can we get more Democrats to support these efforts so that they're not seen as a Republican effort? And I think that that is part of the problem right now. If you start talking about choice and vouchers and charter schools, you are seen as being a Republican. And so what we have to do is, I think, give our politicians and our elected officials some cover by constituents getting involved in a different way. Because for a lot of Democrats, and I say this being a Democrat, the biggest challenge that Democrats face is because they get so much of their funding and so much of their support from teachers' unions. And so those legislators often say, okay, well, if I'm going to take this stance over here, which the unions are not going to like, then how am I going to get reelected next term, right? So we have to be able to say to those folks, we are going to recognize the fact that you are being courageous, that you're taking a stance that might be outside of kind of the party protocols, but you're doing the right thing for kids. We need to send a message to those elected officials that we see what they're doing, that we recognize that, and that we're going to make sure that they have the support and resources they need to be reelected when it comes time.
Thank you, Michelle. I would love to take more questions, but we are out of time, and we've committed that we won't run long, so we really appreciate your coming. I think Mark Kennedy has a few closing words to say, but good luck with all you're doing.
Thank you.
What a wonderful speech. It's great to have everybody here today. Thanks for coming. We just want to let you know that on November 9th, I believe it is, we're going to be having the ambassador from Mexico to America. December 9th, we'll be having the ambassador from Mexico to America as our speaker. Stay tuned for email coming out on that. Thanks everybody for coming here today. Look forward to hopefully seeing you next month. Thank you.
The Economic Club of Minnesota's mission is to provide a world-class, nonpartisan forum for national and international leaders in business and public policy to discuss ideas that affect how Minnesota can better compete in the global economy. The Economic Club of Minnesota, engaging the world, strengthening Minnesota.